Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The betrayers of humanity became our last hope. The Rim was a chaotic expanse of lawless planets, asteroid belts filled with hidden outposts and space stations that served as havens for smugglers, warlords, and exiled factions. If there was a place to recruit an army of the most dangerous, unpredictable, and battle-hardened humans left in the galaxy, this was it. Roar had been here before, years ago, back when he had first fled Earth. He knew the players, the factions, the grudges that ran deep between them. Getting them to work together would be damn near impossible, but impossible was something humanity had been proving wrong ever since the Krell arrived. The stolen destroyer emerged from hyperspace near Kalar Drift, a station built into the remains of a shattered moon. It was one of the few neutral hubs in the Rim, no official government, no laws, just a loose understanding that whoever shot first better be prepared to die second. As the ship docked, Roar turned to his crew. "We split up," he ordered. "Kale, you're with me. Wek, reach out to the old MK groups, see who still has a grudge against the Krell. Fka, you work the underworld contacts. If anyone's been selling weapons or tech to the Krell, I want to know." Fka smirked. "You want me to shake down some arms dealers? You really know how to make a girl happy." Roar ignored her and turned to the rest of the crew. "No one goes anywhere alone. The Rim is a graveyard for the reckless." They stepped off the ship into a world of neon lights, the stench of unwashed bodies, and the ever-present hum of violence waiting to explode. Kalar's Drift was packed with exiles from 100 worlds, humans, rogue aliens, genetically modified soldiers, and AI constructs pretending to be people. As they moved through the station, Roar felt the weight of old ghosts pressing against him. It wasn't long before those ghosts made themselves known. A heavy hand clamped onto his shoulder. Instinct took over. Roar spun, drawing his pistol and pressing it under the chin of a grizzled, scarred man. The man barely flinched, a slow grin spreading across his face. Well, the stranger rumbled. "Look what the void spit back out." Roar lowered his weapon, but only slightly. Torrin Kane. Kane was an ex-general, one of Earth's finest before the world collapsed. He had commanded legions once, but after a disastrous last stand against the Krell, he had vanished. Rumors said he had turned warlord, running his own empire out in the Rim. "Never thought I'd see you again, Kane," said Roar. His grin didn't fade, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "I heard you were dead. Then I heard you were leading some kind of rebellion, and now here you are, walking into my backyard." "I need an army," Roar said. He never was one for small talk. "You've got one," Kane's grin widened. "And why would I hand over my forces to you?" Roar met his gaze. "Because we both know what the Krell are doing. They won't stop at Earth. They'll come for every human out here too. You think hiding in the Rim will save you? The Dominion will burn this place to the ground the moment they're done with the rest of us." Kane was silent for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You always did know how to make a speech." He leaned closer. "All right, Roar. You want my army? Then you fight for it." Roar's jaw tightened. "You want me in a pit fight?" Kane shrugged. "Not just you. If you want my army, you fight my best warriors. You win, we talk." Kale swore under her breath. "This is a waste of time." Roar didn't flinch. He knew how things worked in the Rim. You didn't convince men like Kane with words, you convinced them with blood. He cracked his knuckles and stepped forward. "Fine. Let's get this over with." Kane laughed. "Now that's the Roar I remember." The fight was about to begin. The underground fighting pit was carved into the heart of Kalar's Drift, a deep circular chamber lined with jagged metal and rusted beams. The crowd pressed in from every angle, their shouts and cheers reverberating through the space like a living beast hungry for blood. Roar stood in the center of the pit, rolling his shoulders, his muscles tight with anticipation. The rules were simple, win or die. Cain leaned against the railing above, smirking down at him. Hope you haven't gone soft, Roar. My fighters don't pull punches. Roar smirked back. Neither do I. The gates slammed open and his first opponent stepped into the pit, a mountain of a man, Creek the Bone Breaker, a former shock trooper who had earned his name by snapping the spines of his enemies with his bare hands. His skin was covered in scars, his cybernetic arm humming with energy. The crowd roared. Bets were placed. Then the fight began. Creek lunged, his massive fist swinging like a hammer. Roar barely dodged, feeling the air tremble from the force of the strike. He countered with a sharp blow to the ribs, but Creek barely reacted. The giant grinned and grabbed Roar by the throat. Pain exploded in his body as Creek slammed him into the ground. The crowd erupted. Blood stained the floor. Roar gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. Creek was stronger, that meant nothing. Strength could be outmaneuvered. As Creek lifted him for another slam, Roar twisted, shifting his weight, locking his legs around the giant's arm. A second later, Creek's cybernetic limb was in the wrong position, and Roar snapped it at the joint. Creek roared in agony, stumbling back. Roar didn't waste the moment. He leapt forward, his fist striking with brutal precision, one to the throat, two to the jaw, and the final blow to the temple. Creek collapsed. Silence. Then the crowd exploded. Cain let out a whistle from above. Not bad, but we're not done. The gates opened again. Two opponents this time, a knife-wielding assassin with enhanced reflexes and a hulking brute with titanium-plated fists. Roar exhaled. His knuckles ached, his ribs burned, but he ignored it. Pain was temporary. He clenched his fists. Come on, then. The second fight began. The assassin struck first, a blur of silver as the blade flashed toward his throat. Roar ducked, but the brute was already swinging, a wrecking ball of a punch aimed for his head. He twisted, barely avoiding it, but the assassin's knife grazed his arm, drawing blood. He was fast, but they were faster. Roar had no choice but to fight dirty. He grabbed a handful of sand from the pit floor and flung it into the assassin's eyes. The man recoiled, cursing, and in that split second, Roar spun, slamming his elbow into the brute's throat before driving his knee into his ribs. The brute staggered but didn't go down. The assassin recovered, lunging blindly with his blade, but Roar caught his wrist, twisting it until he heard the sickening snap of bone. The knife fell. Roar caught it and drove it into the brute's leg. The massive fighter bellowed in pain, dropping to one knee. Roar didn't give him a chance to recover. He drove his fist into the man's jaw with every ounce of strength he had left. The brute fell. The assassin, writhing in pain, surrendered. The crowd lost their minds. Roar stood in the center of the pit, breathing hard, blood dripping from his wounds but still standing. Cain watched from above, his smirk widening. Well, he said, amused, looks like you're still the same bastard I remember. Roar wiped the blood from his mouth. Do I have my army? Cain chuckled. You've got your damn army. The deal was made. The war was about to change. Cain's forces weren't just a ragtag group of mercenaries, they were hardened warriors, ex-soldiers, bounty hunters, cybernetic killers, and ruthless smugglers who had survived in the lawless rim for years. If there was any group in the galaxy that could strike fear into the Krell, it was them. Roar stood on a makeshift command platform aboard Cain's flagship, the Iron Fang, as hundreds of battle-hardened fighters gathered before him. Their eyes were cold, their faces marked by years of war and struggle. These weren't idealists, they weren't fighting for earth or honor or vengeance. They were fighting because war was all they knew. Roar scanned the crowd, then spoke. I won't waste time with speeches, he said. You all know why we're here. The Krell took Earth. They took our people. And now they think they've won. He let the words sink in before stepping forward. But we're still here. We're still breathing. And we're going to show the Krell exactly what kind of mistake they made. Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathered warriors. Kane stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching carefully. This was his army, and though he had agreed to fight, Roar knew he still had to prove himself as their leader. Kale activated the holo map, displaying Draxus Prime, the high-security Krell prison world where General Voss was being held. The planet was a fortress, with orbital defense platforms, automated gun turrets, and legions of Krell soldiers guarding its prisoners. Breaking in wasn't just difficult, it was suicide. Fka studied the map, whistling. I count at least 3 separate kill zones. That's not even counting the planetary defense grid. Kane chuckled. Looks like you finally picked a fight worth dying for, Roar. Roar ignored him and turned to Kale. Tell me you've got something. Kale smirked. I always do. She brought up another projection, a hidden access point deep within the prison facility. The Krell have gotten arrogant, she said. They think no one would be stupid enough to try an infiltration, so they've left a small security gap, a ventilation tunnel large enough for a small strike team to enter undetected. If we get inside, we can disable the planetary defense grid from within. Kane raised an eyebrow. And the fleet? You expect my ships to just sit pretty while you sneak in? Roar shook his head. No. Your fleet is our distraction. Silence. Then Kane laughed. I like it. You sneak in and disable the defenses while we keep the Krell busy. Risky as hell, but it just might work. Kale folded her arms. Only problem is, once we disable the defenses, we still have to get out. That was the part Roar hadn't quite figured out yet, but he wasn't going to show doubt. We'll figure that out once we're inside, he said. We hit fast, break Voss out, and get the hell out before the Krell can react. Kane's soldiers exchanged looks. Some grinned, others looked skeptical. But no one backed down because this was what they lived for. Roar looked over the faces of the people he had just recruited. He had won them over in the pit, but now they were about to walk into the most dangerous mission of their lives. Anyone who doesn't want in, speak now, he said. No one moved. Kane grinned. Looks like you've got your war, Roar. Roar exhaled. This was it, the moment they turned the tide of the war. Because once they broke into Draxus Prime and rescued Voss, the Krell wouldn't just be fighting a rebellion. They'd be fighting an uprising. And this time, humanity wasn't playing by the rules. The fleet emerged from hyperspace like a phantom in the void. Kane's warships, fast, heavily modified, and completely unpredictable, held formation just beyond the Krell's sensor range. The Iron Fawn, a heavily armed battle cruiser, sat at the center of the ragtag armada, its dark hull blending into the backdrop of space. On board the stolen Krell destroyer, Roar stood with his strike team in the drop bay, tightening the straps of his combat gear. Beside him, Kale checked her hacking tools while Fka spun a stolen Krell blade between her fingers, clearly enjoying the anticipation of the fight ahead. All right, Roar said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his gut. This is it. Kale brought up the holo map of Draxus Prime. The planet was a fortress, its atmosphere choked with ion storms and its surface scarred from past wars. Towering prison structures jutted from the ground like jagged spikes, surrounded by thick walls and endless patrols. This place wasn't built for escapes, Kale muttered. Roar nodded. Good thing we aren't escaping. We're breaking in. From the bridge, Kane's voice crackled over the comms. Hope you're ready, Roar, because we're about to wake the Krell up in the worst way possible. Roar smirked. Do it. Outside, hell descended. Kane's fleet opened fire, a storm of missiles and plasma rounds slammed into Draxus Prime's orbital defenses, lighting up the darkness like wildfire. The Krell weren't caught entirely off guard, but they hadn't expected an all-out assault. Alarm klaxons shrieked across the system as Krell warships scrambled to respond. The sky burned, and while the Krell rushed to meet the full force of Kane's fleet, no one noticed the stolen destroyer slipping through the chaos. Roar's strike team descended in silence, their dropship punching through the atmosphere, navigating the violent ion storms with expert precision. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating the massive prison below. 5 seconds to landing, Kale called. Roar gripped the overhead bar, his stomach tightening as the drop ship plunged toward the surface. The hidden ventilation shaft was barely large enough to accommodate the ship, and the pilot had to fight against brutal winds and security sensors to line up the approach. Then boom, a Krell missile struck near their landing zone, sending a shock wave through the ship. Warnings flashed red. "We're hit," the pilot shouted. "Hold it together," Roar barked. "Get us down." With a final burst of thrusters, the ship slammed into the landing zone, skidding across the metal platform. The rear hatch hissed open, and the team moved like lightning. "We're in," Roar said into his comm, proceeding with infiltration. Kane's voice came back through static. "Better hurry. The Krell are pissed." Inside the prison, chaos was already brewing. The Krell had noticed the battle above, and their security forces were shifting. Patrols moved toward the outer defenses, leaving the ventilation shafts vulnerable, just as Kale had predicted. The team slipped inside, moving in absolute silence. Dim red emergency lights flickered as they navigated the industrial tunnels, the hum of machinery masking their footsteps. Kale worked fast, hacking into the security network. "All right," she whispered. "Voss is in cell block Theta 9. We need to move now." They moved fast and brutal. The first Krell patrol never even saw them coming. Vka took one out with a knife to the throat while Roar shot the second through the skull with his silenced pistol. The next squad wasn't as easy. The moment they stepped into the main corridor, a Krell officer turned, his eyes widening in recognition before he roared an alarm. The prison erupted into gunfire. Red lights flashed. Sirens screamed. They had 3 minutes before the whole prison locked down. "Go!" Roar shouted. They sprinted down the corridor as Krell soldiers poured in from both sides. Vka's twin pistols spat fire, dropping enemies with pinpoint accuracy. Kale threw an EMP charge ahead, knocking out a security turret just as it locked onto them. They reached Theta 9. Kale rushed to the panel, overriding the security locks. Sparks flew as the door groaned open, revealing General Voss. The old soldier was battered, bruised, and covered in dried blood, but his eyes still burned with fury. He looked at Roar and grinned. "Took you long enough." "Shut up and move," Roar snapped, tossing him a weapon. Voss caught it and cocked the rifle without hesitation. "Let's kill some of these bastards." They turned just as a Krell warlord stepped into the corridor. The towering alien was clad in reinforced battle armor, plasma blades igniting on both arms. His voice was a guttural growl of rage and triumph. "You will not leave this place alive, human." Roar tightened his grip on his rifle. "Let's find out." The final battle for Draxus Prime had begun. The Krell warlord charged. Roar barely had time to react before plasma blades slashed through the air, searing the metal walls where he had stood a second earlier. The heat from the attack stung his face as he dodged, rolling aside and raising his rifle. He fired, but the warlord's armor absorbed the shots, barely slowing him down. Vka's twin pistols barked, sending rounds into the warlord's joints, but he powered through, knocking her aside with a brutal backhand. She slammed into the wall, groaning in pain. "Not working," Kale growled. "That armor is too thick." The warlord lunged for Roar again, plasma blades aimed straight for his chest. Then boom, a sniper round slammed into the warlord's shoulder, staggering him. General Voss stood behind them, smirking, rifle smoking from the shot. Looks like I still got it. Roar didn't waste the moment. He surged forward, pulling a thermal charge from his belt and slamming it onto the warlord's chest plate. The Krell's glowing eyes widened in fury as he realized what had happened. Roar kicked him back. Enjoy hell. The thermal charge detonated, blasting through the armor and ripping the warlord apart in a fiery explosion. The shock wave shook the corridor, sending smoke and shrapnel flying. Silence followed. Then Kale exhaled. Damn, that was satisfying. No time to celebrate, Roar said, reloading. We need to get the hell out of here. The prison's full security force was closing in. Krell reinforcements flooded the halls, gunfire raining down from every angle. The strike team pushed forward, gunning down enemy after enemy as they carved a path to the extraction point. Kale hacked into the security system, forcing open the last set of blast doors. Vka tossed a grenade behind them, sending a wave of fire into the Krell's advance forces. They burst onto the landing platform just as Kane's fleet arrived above them. The sky was on fire. Krell warships were burning, their defenses crumbling under the relentless assault from Kane's mercenary fleet. Explosions rippled across the surface, sending plumes of smoke into the atmosphere. And then the Iron Fang dropped out of the clouds, its massive cannons roaring as it leveled the prison's defenses. Your ride's here, Roar, Kane's voice crackled through the comms. Don't keep me waiting. The stolen Krell dropship swooped down, side doors opening as a gunner covered their escape. One by one they jumped aboard, Kale dragging Voss up just as Krell's soldiers swarmed the platform. Roar was the last to board. He turned, looking at the burning prison below. Thousands of human prisoners were rising up, taking advantage of the chaos to turn their weapons against their captors. The Krell were losing control. He smirked. Then he leapt onto the ship as it lifted off, engines screaming as they blasted into the sky. They had done it. They had broken Drax's prime. The stolen destroyer jumped to hyperspace, carrying them to safety as Kane's fleet made their final retreat. With General Voss freed, the human resistance had a real leader again. With Kane's forces joining the fight, humanity now had an army. The Krell were no longer hunting a dying species, they were facing a rebellion. A war they thought was already won had just begun anew. Roar stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak past. He had been called a traitor once, exiled and discarded. Now he was leading humanity's last stand. And this time, they would not fall.